Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Mike. For those of you who don't know who I am, I talk about space on this channel, obviously from my space news sign. And not only do I talk about NASA and what's going on with commercial and private companies within the United States, but I also talk about international companies and government efforts as well. And I really haven't done a whole lot of that in my videos up to this point, but today I want to start that. And today I want to talk about China and what they've been up to the past couple of years. And they've been up to a lot of really crazy stuff. Back in 2003, they had their first manned space flight, which was built by their own indigenous rocket. They built the whole thing themselves. But the design of the spacecraft has been copied from the Russians, and it's based off of the Soyuz spacecraft. But it's not a direct copy of the Soyuz spacecraft. Let me show you a couple images to kind of clarify my point. This is the Russian Soyuz spacecraft, which was designed to compete with the American Apollo spacecraft to go to the moon. And even though the Russians lost the moon race, they decided to continue to fly the Soyuz spacecraft and make improvements, and it still flies to this day. But after the moon race was lost, the Russians decided that what they wanted to do was to build space stations in order to do reconnaissance and science in orbit around Earth. And the guy who designed the Soyuz spacecraft, Sergei Korolyov, he put forward a proposal called the Soyuz-R, which would be a regular Soyuz docked with a modified Soyuz, which would have the same service module, but a new type of orbital module, which would have all sorts of reconnaissance equipment, such as cameras and things like that, to be able to do this first type of space station. But instead, Russia decided to go with Chalamet's design, the Salyut, or Almaz. 8 of the Salyut stations flew, 2 of which making the core modules of the Mir space station and the International Space Station. But the interesting thing that I want to point out about the design that didn't win, the Soyuz-R, is the orbital module of the modified Soyuz. That design was improved upon and used in the Chinese Shenzhou spacecraft as its orbital module. But it has the same descent module and the same service module as the Soyuz spacecraft. Now, like the Soyuz spacecraft, the Shenzhou spacecraft is designed for 3 people. And back in 2003, they had their first person ride into space, and then they've had 2 people in space, and most recently they had their first spacewalk. And their next step is to have their own space station. Now, like the Shenzhou spacecraft, their space station has a little bit of Russian heritage as well. So I need to explain that a little bit. 2 different versions of the space station flew, which were the scientific Salyut stations and the military Almaz space stations. And they decided that they wanted to design a new type of vehicle to service either type of those space stations. And that vehicle was the TKS spacecraft, which had its own service module to send cosmonauts back to Earth, as well as a brand new type of service module, which essentially gave them a new type of spacecraft to send cargo and crew to the space stations. And although they decided to stay with the Soyuz as their main vehicle, the TKS spacecraft, especially the service module, was redesigned as their functional cargo block, or FGB module. And the original Salyut designs were repurposed to become a core module for a much larger station. These were known as the DOS modules. And the core module for the Mir space station was attached with these FGB cargo modules, repurposed as space station modules. And most of the other modules on the space station were all based upon this FGB block, just different variations and different designs, eventually being assembled together as the Mir space station. But the FGB was also the first module of the International Space Station, the Zarya module, which was connected with the Unity module and eventually the Zvezda module, which is the original Salyut design repurposed as a core module. So the TKS spacecraft, repurposed as the FGB module, is still flying today as the core module of the International Space Station. So what does any of this have to do with the Chinese? Well, when the Chinese got a bunch of their information and designs from the Russians in order to make their Shenzhou spacecraft, they also got the designs for the FGB and also the DOS modules. So the Chinese are building their first space station, which is going to be called the Tiangong, or the Heavenly Palace. And they're pretty far along in their development. The Tiangong 1 is going to be launching this year, 2011. And of course it's going to be unmanned at first, and they're going to send a Shenzhou spacecraft to dock with the space station. Now that's going to be Shenzhou 8, and it's going to be unmanned as well. And once they have this whole docking done, then they have been able to accomplish the docking of 2 different spacecraft. They've experimented around with having satellites rendezvous with each other, so I think that they've gotten their knowledge of being able to do rendezvous with those experiments that they've done with the satellites. But they still have yet to accomplish docking. which should be accomplished with this first Tiangong mission. Now let's take a little bit closer look at what the Tiangong looks like. This is a picture of the docking between the Tiangong and the Shenzhou, and here's the Shenzhou spacecraft right here, and this is the Tiangong spacecraft. But what does that spacecraft look like? Does it look familiar to anyone? It's the TKS-derived FGB. So they're going to have an FGB, or Zarya module, as their first Tiangong, or Heavenly Palace, and they're going to have a couple missions after Shenzhou 8, which are going to have crew on it, and that's going to be Shenzhou 9 and 10. And after that, they want to start adding more modules, and they want to start flying the DOS, or Zvezda module, or Salyut module, whatever you want to call it. It's going to look like this. The original Tiangong 1 isn't going to be a part of this space station, at least as far as I know. They're going to have a new core module, or Salyut module, with new experiment modules 1 and 2, or FGB modules. And you can see it's docked with a manned spacecraft. And then, what is this? It seems like the Chinese are building their own cargo ship, which nobody has mentioned, which is obviously different from the manned spacecraft. So they're going to be testing out everything they need to know with Tiangong 1, with docking and actually living there, and probably doing a few cargo missions as well. And then with the new Heavenly Palace, as long as they design the docking ports to be adaptable with the Russians, any new Russian modules put into space could be docked with this space station. I mean, the modules on the International Space Station could be undocked and docked with the Heavenly Palace instead. And I hope that doesn't happen. What I do hope is that we are able to have more of a spirit of friendship and cooperation with the Chinese. I don't believe that the Chinese are purely going to be militarizing space. I mean, that's the same thing that a lot of these xenophobic warmongers said about the Russians. And now we're best friends with the Russians, and they're going to be providing our astronauts rides to the International Space Station when the space shuttle retires, which is going to be this year. So we need to get over that and start cooperating with the Chinese and being friends with them and getting stuff done together. And if we can do that, then no one's really going to be left out of the club. We're already working with the Europeans and the Japanese. We can work with the Chinese as well, and they're the only other country other than America and the Russians who have been able to have their own people sent into space. So if we could cooperate with them, just think of the possibilities of what we could get done. We could all go back to the moon faster, we could all go on to asteroids sooner, and we could all go on to Mars. Instead of trying to compete with each other, we should all work together. But if that's just not going to happen, if that's not going to work, then let's go and do another space race. Let's race China back to the moon. Let's race China to some next destination, whether it be asteroids or whatever. Let's do something. So, in closing, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up right here, and maybe even favorite it if you like. Share it around on your Facebook and Twitter. And if you want to see more of my videos, you can subscribe to the videos right up there. And yeah, I hope to see more of you guys, and hopefully you see more of me, and I'll see you next time.